Well, hello everyone. I wanted to talk a little bit about my feelings on a documentary that came out last year, 2018. It was shown as a premiere on A&E last evening on cable, and it's called Above Us Only Sky, which is yet another another take on the John Lennon Imagine album sessions for the most part. And I just thought I'd give you my thoughts on it, having watched it for my first time. By the way, if you haven't seen it, keep checking A&E because it's going to be on again, so you might get a chance to check it out for yourself. Directed by Michael Epstein, and it has a lot of talking heads moments, which I like. A lot of people, pick on that. They say, "Well, I don't want to see too many people discussing about, the topic at hand." They don't want to see people that were there uh, giving a lot of chit chat time. But I think that's what you need in a documentary like this. So therefore, we get some time with people like Klaus Vormann, a longtime friend of the Beatles, who played bass guitar on the Imagine album, and also Alan White and Jim Keltner, the drummers, and Jack Douglas, the producer. Although I was kind of surprised there wasn't as much footage of Jack Douglas weighing in with his thoughts, but overall, no complaints there. Um, the movie really is concerned for the most part about the Imagine album, which John and Yoko released in 1971, um, and being on their estate at Tittenhurst and the studio that was there, where they had an in-house capability to make their own music there, and there's a lot of footage that we haven't seen yet, even die-hard fans, and is always, to me anyway, my first concern. Are we going to have footage that we haven't seen before? Because we've seen it all, right? I had heard going into this, excuse me, that there was a lot of good stuff that we hadn't seen before. And even though some of the situations may be the same, some of the locations, some of the interviews that we'd seen before, for the most part, it is different footage, different angles, even if you've seen the same songs before being recorded in the studio. It's always a treat. It makes me really think, I wonder how much of this footage is out there, because John and Yoko did record a lot of their life on film, and it makes me think that there's a treasure trove of stuff still waiting for us that we have not yet seen. So, as I say, the film goes through the making of the Imagine album, but I think in a good way, what it does is it veers away at times, and we start getting some backstory into John, backstory into Yoko, their young years, how they met again, and just taking it away sometimes, and then every now and then coming back to the studio for the album. So you don't just get like tied down into the studio room. And I think that was a really good touch. It takes you around in different aspects of John and Yoko. Um, Getting back to the rare footage, I really wonder if any of the footage that they shot of themselves and their life together, I really wonder if there's anything dating beyond Imagine, because so much of it is in the studio for Imagine. But, like, for example, just off the top of my head, did they have a lot of footage when they got together with the Elephants Memory Band and were doing a lot of rehearsals and preparing for the One to One concert from 1972? Is there any of that stuff? Is there anything from the Plastic Ono Band era, from 1970? I mean, is it always just the Imagine 71 stuff? Uh, I want to talk about a couple of things in this documentary that really made me pleased to see. One of them has to do with Klaus Vormann putting in a good case for Yoko's influence on John. Klaus was there, he knew the two of them, he was a personal friend, and people, as we know, always coming down hard on Yoko, always bashing him. And I think, much to this film's credit, it really restores the feeling of why John was so needy for Yoko and why she fulfilled all those empty spots in his life that he required. That's a whole other video on its own. It's a pet peeve of mine that people get down on Yoko and people get down on John for being with Yoko, when it plainly shows how important she was in this documentary to John's life and well-being. So hopefully some people with more open minds that kind of put that kind of hatred and preconceived knee-jerk stuff out of the way for a while will have a better appreciation for Yoko in this, I hope. Another thing that I liked is Julian Lennon was interviewed. I'm glad he got some time here because a lot of times he seems to be glossed over. He doesn't seem to be part of a lot of these projects. But more importantly, I really like Julian. I like his music. However, he seems like the kind of nice guy you'd want to go out and talk with and have a drink with or something. But lately, in past years, decade or so, he's been really, really sour and bad mouthing of John as a deadbeat dad and everything. I'm glad that none of that is really in this documentary, and thankfully there's so much footage of little boy Julian present with John and Yoko on the estate, playing on the grounds with his friends and stuff. You can tell a lot of it's malarkey, a lot of it's exaggeration. I think when Julian himself says, "Oh, I never saw Dad," and much, and a lot of people out there, Yoko bashers, mostly say, "Well, Yoko didn't want the boy around John," and there's plenty of footage with. Showing the truth. The proof is in the pudding, right? Seeing it for yourself. You can see that Yoko is quite content to have Julian there. They're all there, in the rowboat. They're there on the grounds. A lot of nonsense. It's a load of nonsense. And just to go extend this a little bit, there's a lot of footage in other years too, from the 1969 era when John has the beard, with Julian and Kyoko, Yoko's daughter, together. You also see photographs of them in, I think, 1979. I think it's 79, with the family, all of them together, seeing his dad. So, I mean, not to take away from Julian's experience, he experienced it for himself. He knows better than anybody else how he feels he was neglected or not, and indeed he was. Because as I've always said in John's defense, I think Julian kind of more or less hints at this and admits it in the documentary. John had a lot of pressure, and he was sometimes attacked. And when you're a young man yourself, as John was in your very early 20s, not even really past teenage years, and you become kind of a accidental father, if you will, and now all of a sudden you're struck with mega fame and you've got to tour the entire world. How can you possibly be home with your boy? You can't. It's an immense pressure, I imagine, and an immense difficult situation that I don't think most of us here could ever relate to or appreciate, unless we were superstars to the extent of an Elvis Presley or Beatles. So I'm very glad that some of that was taken care of too. I have some notes here just so I don't forget anything I wanted to say. One thing on the downside a little bit, I'm kind of sad whenever I see stuff like this, because we know John Lennon was taken from us in 1980. He didn't really have much time. He was only 40 years old when he was killed, and because of that, through no fault of his, certainly, we don't have much footage. And I feel like when I'm watching footage like this, even though we get some juicy different angles and different shots altogether, different dialogue, it's always, when you watch John, it has to be the 1970s. It's always the same period. We didn't get to see John in the 80s, 90s, 21st century. So I feel sad that it's always the same type of footage. Nothing we can do about that. When you watch John Lennon stuff, when you talk about John Lennon, it's always going to be the 1970s. It's going to be the Vietnam War. It's going to be the Nixon administration. It's going to be those years, you know what I mean? That are getting more and more dated, obviously, as the decades progress. So that's very unfortunate that we can't have John looking different. We can't have a different period other than the 1970s. It gets kind of old, quite frankly, and it's very restricted on what we can see. And even a film like this, how many ways, I wonder, can we keep altering or changing or presenting, is a better word, presenting this kind of footage? We've had, when John and Yoko made their first film, the Imagine film, that was called Imagine, and I think released in '72, and it was just about the songs on the album, kind of like a video album of Imagine. We had that, and of course later on we had the Imagine John Lennon documentary, which was John's whole life really, but there was a good chunky helping of this footage of making the Imagine album in the studio, you know. And then you had the Give Me Some Truth documentary, which was also about the making of the Imagine album. So we've been through there with that. As I say, every time you watch this, there's different footage used, and there's probably a lot more to be mined. But it just makes me think, like, we've seen a lot of this before, and there's not much else you can do. I mean, it is what it is, and we don't have as much of wealth of stuff to say as we do with a Paul McCartney to get so many decades of enjoyment. We also had John Lennon, New York City, which I think was a really great documentary. So, like I say, a lot of this is kind of very familiar territory, just presented differently. Anyway, I definitely enjoyed the movie, and I recommend it to anybody out there to get a better understanding, maybe, of John and Yoko. And certainly, if you're a diehard fan, you can't miss it. Thanks, everyone.